My name's Stephen Hegedus. As I was just introduced, I'm the Dean of Education at Southern, and prior to that, I was a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, a professor of mathematics, math education, and have spent a large part of my career building accessible programs for each and every learner, and leading some interventions to scale in Massachusetts, in Texas, and in California, and have made an impact on closing that achievement gap that we face in our society, and it's a reality, but also key focus not just on curriculum, but on the socio-emotional components, on the affective dimensions. That's critical, so we treat our learners, our kids, as human beings, and not just knowledge receptors. So that's been a critical part of my work in my career. And so when I came to Southern, this is my 5th year, one of the first persons I met was Dr. Comer. I knew of him and his work before, and we clicked straight away. We know what we needed to do, and we've just actually received the second wave of funding from the Kellogg Foundation, and that's a major part of why we continue to be here and be here today, so that was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Faye, for everything you've done since we've been here. I think one of the key things, I just want to give a little bit of background and then introduce the panel and get into the all-important questions that we have here today. When we talk about partnership, but the reason why we're talking about partnership so much, one of the things I saw when I arrived in Connecticut was another divide between schools and universities. I'd seen it a little bit in Massachusetts, and what that divide means is that there's finger pointing. You know, the universities, the colleges will look at the schools and saying, why aren't you doing a better job? The schools look at the colleges and universities saying, why aren't you preparing better teachers? And there's all this friction that is counterproductive. And what is critical, my colleagues and I talk about a P20 spectrum, a P20 plus. So it isn't just one system and another system. We're all part of that lifelong learning for our children, for our young adults, and for us as we continue to learn. I'm actually on leave for a few months on an ACE fellowship. I'm working at URI, and I was joking with someone, I'm learning every day. I didn't know there was so much out in this world to learn, right? So, and when you're around really good, deep thinkers who care, that's critical, and Dr. Comer and his team are one of those. We talk about ourselves as a collaborative to that point, and we talk about the collaborative as a strategy, not just a fancy term or a word, but actually as a strategy which forces us every time we meet, right, Faye, what are we doing, why are we here, let's rethink through what are our goals every time, so that we're making intentional decisions in our work. It's focused, the learner's at the center, and we keep questioning what we're doing. And so the collaborative is a strategy. I want you to think about that, because when we can't individualize this work into different sectors. It's all part of one big team. So I think the Commissioner of Education talked about that this morning, and that I've seen under the leadership of some of the deans as well in the state. We are forming those partnerships with schools and strengthening the quality of teachers and professionals and educational leaders in our society here. So yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm going to now introduce our panelists, who will be doing the majority of the talking. Dr. Mike Alfano. I've asked each of what I'm going to present, not just who they are, but why they're here and what are their biggest concerns that we feel that we are facing and challenged with in our society today. Mike is the Dean of the Isabelle Farrington College of Education at Sacred Heart University. He was exposed to Dr. Comer's work as a doctoral student while studying evidence-based approaches to school reform. His work has impacted, Dr. Comer's work has impacted how Dr. Alfano conceptualizes and thinks about teacher preparation programs at the institutions that he's worked for now over 20 years. Mike says his biggest concern right now centers on the teacher shortages in our country that we're currently facing, and the implications that short-term, quick-fix approaches to preparing teachers will have on children, families, and communities. That's a major concern I share as well. Next to Dr. Alfano is Kathy Russell-Beck, the principal of Beecher Museum Magnet School here in New Haven. And Kathy has worked collaboratively with the SDP since 2007, successfully implementing and embracing the COMA philosophy school-wide. One concern that she has is that students attend school daily. However, many have issues that prevent them from meeting their full potential, and schools still lack the resources to support children in crisis. So it's one of the major concerns that Kathy has. Erik Clemons, next to Kathy, the CEO and president of ConnCAT and also a member of our Board of Education. He has known Dr. Coma for many years. His daughters have been recipients of SDP during their time in New Haven Public Schools, and his concern with school leadership, not necessarily understanding the impact that poverty has on the child, the parent, and the community. And last but not least, Christina Natale is a kindergarten teacher at the Davis Academy for Arts and Design Innovation. She was introduced to COMA during her undergraduate studies at Southern Connecticut State University and was able to participate in a professional development opportunity that hosted and enabled her to interact with current New Haven teachers to learn about the COMA process and how it can be used in the classroom. And she's continued to stay in touch and work with the team ever since. Her major concern is that students' basic needs are not being met throughout the school day, and as a result, their misbehavior ends up being misunderstood. So thank you to each and every one of you on our panel. So I wanted to give you a bit of background on who they are and their focus. We're going to start with a few questions. I see this morning that you're very engaged and you have lots of questions, so we're probably going to split the time between the questions that I have for the panel and the questions that you have for the panel as well, and I'll try and keep us to time. So the aim of this session this afternoon is to look forwards, and we've been learning of the great work and the impact over the past 50 years, but the real celebration is going to be in the next 50 years. And where the work is going and will continue to go. And so the preparation of teachers is critical. We've heard that a lot. So I asked the panel, from your own perspectives, how should prospective teachers be prepared today and in the future? Mike, would you like to start? And then you can ping pong back and forth as you would.
Well, good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank and congratulate Dr. Comer and thank colleagues for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm humbled and honored to be able to speak today. I'd like to come at Dr. Hegedus' question from Dr. Comer's overarching question earlier on, and how are we still here in terms of how I frame my response from sort of two perspectives. One is that forward-looking, optimistic perspective around how we are preparing educators and how we should be preparing educators as we move into the future. And I'd also like to come back at that perspective from the current challenges that directly, from my perspective, address Dr. Comer's question, fundamental question. I don't think in the history of our profession in teacher preparation, just to back up, we've heard Dr. Darlin Hammond, Dr. Shriver, Dr. Comer, and others throughout our time we've shared together talk about the evidence and the state of the art and the science that undergirds developmentally grounded education and its critical importance to the preparation of educators. I would argue that a similar body of evidence also exists around what we know and ought to be included in evidence-based high-quality teacher preparation. I don't think in the history of our profession the evidence has been more clear in terms of what and ought to be included in evidence-based high-quality teacher preparation, and at the core of that clearly being developmentally grounded preparation for our teacher candidates. That doesn't happen quickly. That doesn't happen without a significant amount of time, energy, and expertise, and the integration of a variety of different stakeholders in the thoughtful preparation of our teachers. So how we work with our school-based partners, what type of school-based partners we're working with, how colleges and schools of education are building their curricula and doing it in a way where those different pieces are working together so that the theory to practice emphasis is there and it's clearly accessible for teacher candidates as they move towards practice. This takes time, this takes energy, and there are frankly no shortcuts, in my opinion. So the state of the art is there, and many forward-thinking deans around the country and clearly in our state are working with their faculties. I know at Sacred Heart we are, I know Dr. Hegedus is at Southern, and colleagues around the region have and are continuing to reorganize how they're approaching teacher preparation aligned to Dr. Comer's work and others so that we know those candidates are what some of the literature talks about as learner ready the day they enter their class. But here's the challenge, and here's the part that directly gets at Dr. Comer's question. Learner ready is one thing as they enter the profession, but there's some fairly sobering data out there to suggest that 1 out of 2 educators are leaving the profession by year 5. So if we come back to one of the operating premises of our entire time together, that relationships matters, that's at the core of all this work, and the key drivers of those relationships are our teachers, and 1 out of 2 of those teachers disproportionately is leaving urban areas and rural areas where we have some of our highest concentrations of poverty. That answer to that question becomes more palpable. We can see that there is a vicious cycle that many of our communities and folks like Dr. Darling Hammond have written about, that we are starting and stopping. So as much as we have learned a great deal about what's required and ought to be part of high-quality, evidence-based teacher preparation, we have some systemic challenges in terms of the way our profession is operating and how our profession is being viewed, and that can be a whole other conference, frankly, in terms of the state of the art in terms of educator and leadership preparation. And I'll finish my remarks here for this question, coming back to my earlier statement around shortcuts. Many of our colleagues who are working are on the front lines and are charged with making sure that our schools are staffed by qualified educators, as an outcome of this turnover, have had to look in our teaching workforce, have had to look to alternative ways to bring people into our schools and communities, which are not aligned to what we know are evidence-based practices. And that's done out of necessity. I'm convinced of that. However, there are serious implications for children and communities when we have underprepared educators working with some of our most vulnerable children. So we have our work cut out in front of us, and thankfully work like Dr. Comer's and others is helping us to understand how we ought to be proceeding into the future.
Kathy, do you want to go next?
Oh,
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Comer and the SDP, for this invitation. I'm truly humbled by it, and my fellow panelists, it's an honor to sit with you. This question is loaded because the impact certainly does happen at the building level. So the statistic that you shared with 1 or 2 of the teachers leaving by the 5th year falls on the students and at the building level. So my colleagues out there who are principals certainly know what that feels like and how devastating that is for all of us to have to shoulder that. So many times I will interview a prospective teacher, and they have such great ideas of what they're going to do in the classroom, and they're so enthusiastic. They've learned the content, and they're going to do this and do that, and they really do have great intentions of being successful. But the piece that is missing, and to be really frank, is that they have culture shock when they step into the classroom. And that's not to be insulting, it's just to be real, because so many of them have not lived or served or experienced the community that they are now going to teach in. And so what they are seeing in the classroom, those babies in front of them, they have not probably even had at the university level a Black teacher or a Hispanic professor. And so they are not familiar with our community, with our culture. And so they don't understand the community. As a building leader, I try to give them that space to reflect instead of react. And it took me a while to get there because I had to react because the urgency was that my kids weren't learning anything because the adult was breaking down in the room, and I got to get the kids to learn, but I also had to help this adult who needed time to understand what was happening because it was real, and it really wasn't meant to be, hurtful to the student, but it was the teacher's reality many times. So now, when we interview teachers, we say, how will you build relationships with your students and your parents? What will you do explicitly to ensure that each child feels valued? What do you know about our community? What do you know about the population you say you want to teach in? So we give our teachers that space to really reflect and really think about where they're stepping into. And it helps a lot. And we teach them how to work with the parents from the very beginning. I forget who mentioned that earlier, how important that is. We're talking about sometimes 22-year-olds coming into your building with mothers who have raised 5 kids. This is their 5th go-around. And you're going to tell the mother about not coming to school. You're really going to have that conversation. They have to grow into that. It's my role to support them through that, to pair them with other teachers. So to answer the question is that you have to be supportive of the teachers that are coming out without this background, without having been in communities and having exposure, and teaching them to have a 360 view of that child and of our community. And the university has to expose them to field placements and student teaching in communities that they say they want to serve in. I think that's what
Thank you, Kathy. Gary. Erik?
Good afternoon, everyone. So first, as everyone else did, I wanted to thank especially Dr. Comer and SDP for allowing me. This is a great honor because I feel very deeply about Dr. Comer personally. And I think a lot about 50 years this has existed, which is incredible to me. And I think a lot about what has happened to this country after Dr. King was assassinated. And this was created the same year Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. So to me, that in and of itself is a deep testament to the work of Dr. King carrying on through SDP. And I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here. You know, I was raised very, very poor in deep poverty. That's why my concern was around poverty, Steve. And my high school years, because we were so poor, and in those days, you know, we moved so much that you had to go to school wherever you moved. There were no inter-district magnets, right? You had to, wherever you lived, that's where you went to school. And consequently, because we were always being evicted, I ended up going to 4 different high schools every year of high school. And so what I remember vividly about that experience wasn't really about the academics, because I felt like I was pretty smart, you know? I just was contending with a whole bunch of issues external to the academic institution that I didn't really know how to think critically about or contend with. And so what I came away with, I think, is still true today, and this is no indictment on teaching writ large, but I do believe that it's true, that I think there's an acute focus on human beings being prepared and developed to be great teachers, which I think is great. Yet there is not much focus or energy around developing teachers to be great human beings. And so I'll say that again if you want me to. All right. I think there's an acute focus on human beings being prepared and developed to be great teachers, which I think is amazing. Yet there is not much focus or energy around developing teachers to be great human beings. And I say that because of my experience, right? And especially with kids, and there are a lot of folks who want to teach and go into urban communities, which is kind of a proxy for saying poor communities. And and they don't look like the children nor the parents. And they want to go in and teach, yet they don't really understand the nuances of that community. They don't understand the nuances of poverty. Poverty is a very evil and wicked thing, and it does things to people. There's a psychic pain that comes from poverty that seeps into the academic institutions through those children. And so I think there needs to be some preparation around those kind of adaptive relational values, not so much just kind of, I see a lot of times, teachers and it's not their fault, but it's this performative value, right? How they performed in a given lesson, how they performed. I remember in grad ed, and we had to set up a camera, and the camera had to film us doing the lesson. And I think about that a lot, and I think there needs to be more preparation around, again, adaptive measures, relational value, understanding your community, deeply understanding poverty, knowing that the suffering that people are living with is redemptive, and that you are a partner in redeeming that suffering with those children and families. And so, so that's kind of my answer, and I kind of, and I know this is not a debate, but I softly disagree with Michael, Dr. Alfano, where I think that there have been people who have been well prepared to go into classroom who don't do well, and so I see that a little bit differently, but that's a whole nother issue. But I think one thing that I haven't heard a lot today, and I really don't hear a lot, is love. Right? If you are a teacher, you are responsible for a small human being or a younger human being. And you must go into those schools with a deep and wide love ethic, whereby if that children doesn't get the lesson, at least they know that you care about them. So thank you. So I think there needs to be a little bit more said about that in the curriculum. Thank you.
So, Cristina, talk to us about love.
Absolutely. I just wanted to start out by saying I'm incredibly honored to be in this room with you all and to be sitting next to these amazing panelists. I'm going to be honest, nothing can fully prepare you for your first year of teaching. I thought I was prepared walking into my first year of teaching, and I was incredibly wrong. But there are things that can help you be successful in your first year of teaching, even when you feel like you are at the very bottom. I think what's the core of Comer, that was the core for me in my learning experiences, was relationships. It's the same for kids as it is for us as adults. I would not have survived my first year of teaching without all the relationships. The relationships I had with Faye and Cynthia throughout my first year, the relationships I had with my principals who supported me incredibly, the relationships with my colleagues, the relationships I had with some of my professors in college. I would not be sitting here today if it weren't for them all, so round of applause for all of that. Something that I learned that I think is very important from a woman called Rita Pearson, who did an incredible TED Talk, is something that's really stuck with me throughout my teaching career so far. And it's that every child deserves or needs a hero. And I think that's the same for adults. And in order for me to be successful, I needed to look for other adults that were going to be my hero. I can tell you a little bit about my first year of teaching to give you some background. I had what my principals called one of the 1 in a million year that you get once in your career, with some very challenging behavior issues and some very challenging students in my class. And it was terrifying, I'll be honest. And I realized very quickly from what I had learned at my professional development with Comer that I wasn't going to survive without the relationships that I made with my kids. And I noticed that more importantly sometimes than the academics was the relationships I had with them, and taking a step back and thinking, what is going on with this child in this moment? Are they really bad, or is something bad happening to them? I had this one student who I'm still very close with, who, like we were talking about earlier today, was labeled as the mean kid. And I knew that that wasn't who he was. I could see something a little deeper inside of him, but the problem was that he thought that's who he was. And he had a lot of trouble in my class and a lot of struggles, but I quickly realized that if I could show him a different way, he might be able to overcome his label. And I keep referencing Rita Pearson, but she really stuck with me. She said something that really struck me, which was, if you say something long enough, it starts to become a part of you and a part of who you are. And I think for so long he had told himself that he was the mean kid, that that's who he had become. So we kind of had to work very hard to reverse that and make him say over and over again that he wasn't the mean kid, that he could be better in order to succeed. So I think really coming back to it all, the most important thing for me as a prospective teacher and as a new teacher is all the relationships I've formed along the way with my colleagues, with my principals. I was talking to Kathy Beck earlier today about how important it was to feel supported by my principals my first year. You have moments where you feel so sad about the situation that your students are in and you don't know what to do, and I felt like I was able to go to my principals and bear it all and show them, what I was feeling about my students and cry about the situations that my students were going through, and to feel like she really truly cared about what I had to say about my students really made me feel successful in my first year.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you all. So if I just add my 2 cents, just listening and from all your perspectives and your rich experiences, we still have a lot of work to do. We've made some significant advances in how we work together and prepare teachers and how the systems support teachers, but we've still got a long way to go. We still see those achievement gaps. We still see the same kinds of problems in schools around socio-emotional and child development and adolescent development. We still see those problems. They're still the primary concerns. The data that Dr. Alfano cited is not new. It's been going on for decades. So we've got a long way to go, and we heard this morning from our keynote of how other countries are doing it, and our society needs to invest more heavily in what we do. As a mathematician, and when I came from Old England to New England, what also happened across the pond is this sort of lack of respect for kids and this lack of respect for mathematics. For example, my area, that it's actually okay not to be able to do mathematics. I know, where did that come from? So we need to recenter teaching as a valuable, if not the most valuable profession in our society. And when we do that together as a community, I think these perspectives will change. But we've got a lot of work to do, is what I'm hearing. So I'm going to now shift gear a little bit and combine 2 of the questions and then open it up to our colleagues here, if that's all right. I want us to think about leadership and what are the different roles of leadership for schools and colleges and universities in thinking into the next 50 years. What are those leadership roles? And we have leaders here on our panel. And how can we think about leadership not just within a building or in a district, but collaboratively with the community, with parents, with communities? And let's start with Kathy.
So leadership is, it's not I, it's we. And when I think back to when I started 12 years ago as a building principal, I thought I had to have all the answers. that I had to figure it out. I was the queen of that castle, and if I didn't know the answer, neither did you. And so I learned the hard way that relationships were critical and collaboration was probably my best friend. I learned that very quickly. When I took over Beecher, we were expanding and we had a lot of initiatives. And Comer, Dr. Mayo said, "You are a Comer school." And I said, "Yeah, okay." And Dr. Fay used to come in and I'd be like, "Oh, Dr. Fay is here. I really can't talk. I don't want to talk to Dr. Fay right now. I've got things to do." But I tell you this story because what's important is she was a stakeholder and she was really there, and Dr. Cooper, to support the school. And I wasn't ready to embrace it because I was the leader and I was supposed to do what needed to be done for the school. And I did not have that, I think, leadership maturity at the time to recognize that it is a collaborative effort to move a school forward. And finally, something clicked. People were praying for me. And what clicked was that I realized that the Comer philosophy, the no-fault problem solving, the consensus and the collaboration was exactly what I needed to take on Beecher and to do all of the things that needed to happen. And once I started listening and stopped talking, I was able to hear my teachers and my parents and my students and do the things that needed to be done. I had an aha moment. And what I share that story to say is that we have to start listening to each other. It's really a simple solution. We know that SDP works. We know that the Comer philosophy is foolproof. We all know that students are the core of what we do. Dr. Burks challenged us at our convocation. She said, "Why are you doing what you do? Do you know your why?" The students are our why. And all of us with all of our degrees and letters behind our name, we can't figure this out? Of course we can. Of course we can. And I finally sat down with Dr. Fay and started listening, Dr. Cooper, Sheila, Cynthia, and we put this together. They helped our school, and we moved Beecher forward. And I sat back and I let my parents and my school community have such interest in the school that at one point I didn't feel like I was doing too much of anything because everyone had such a role. And so what I say is that the community, the leaders need to let everyone have a voice and buy in, and it's what we already know. I don't think we have to rethink it.
Thank you. Cristina, from the perspective of the kindergarten teacher.
Yes, I was just going to say, going off of what you were saying, on a much smaller scale, with Comer in the classroom, I think it starts out as, especially in kindergarten, as you as the leader, but slowly the more you start to teach students how to interact with their peers, how to solve problems, you start to notice that they become the leaders of Comer for themselves. And for example, this year I noticed I had a huge problem with tattling. A lot of students would come up to me and tell me everything that was going on. And I noticed that was a way of them telling me that I don't know how to solve my problem, rather than just trying to get their friend in trouble. So I started changing the way I approached tattling. And when a student would come up to me to tattle, I would instead tell them, "Don't tell me, tell them." And I would walk over to the friend with them, and we would talk about the situation and what was going on. And kids, especially in my class at 4 and 5, really need the modeling and the scaffolding to be able to know what to say to their friend. They don't know that I need to go tell Johnny that he bumped me, and even though it was an accident, it hurt my feelings, and we need to solve it. They don't know that. So we've been working really hard this year with going to each other with our problems instead of not talking to each other and not facing them. And it warms my heart when I catch friends without my support, having an issue and saying, "Excuse me, you bumped me and it hurt my feelings." And even if they're kind of eyeing me, looking for my approval, it doesn't bother me because I know that they're looking for my approval to know that they're doing something right, that they're following the procedures that we put in place, and they really do need all that positive reinforcement to make themselves the leaders.
Thank you. Erik, you want to add anything to this?
I don't know if I can add to that, but I'm not a classroom practitioner. I think that when you ask about universities and schools, I don't really know what they should be doing. I do believe that schools and academic institutions should be a viable vehicle to turn a community around. I do believe that, and should be a repository for not just education, but for all things needed for that community. I think as it relates to leadership, I think leaders, especially in schools, should have the ability to be vulnerable, courageous, and have the room and permission to fail. And really important is have the ability to say, "I don't know." A lot of times, I have 4 daughters, and we would be in these meetings with principals especially, and it was clear to me that the person didn't know. And they just came up with any type of education jargon to try and convince me that they knew something that I didn't. So I think that's important. I also think, leaders, especially teachers and principals, I think those people should be called to do what they do. That means teaching chose them. And I think a lot of the issues we see in schools, especially urban schools, is that folks chose to teach, as opposed to teaching choosing them. And so this idea of being called to do something is really, really, to me, very, very important, because it means that you will never give up that thing, no matter how hard it becomes and how much you struggle, that it is so in your bones that you continue to do it till you get it right.
Mike?
Yeah, that's very powerful, and I would agree with everything our colleagues have said. The idea of boundary spanning, bridge building, risk-taking, permission to fail, those things absolutely should be part of a leader's worldview. I guess the one thing I would add, I think goes to the sort of moral nature of leadership, at least in my perspective, and that is the idea of advocacy. As a bridge builder, as a boundary spanner, as a collaborator, as someone who is a consensus builder, I think we also have an obligation in leadership roles, regardless of where you are in that P20 continuum, to be an advocate for children, families, communities, and to take advantage and leverage those relationships across those contexts in ways that can improve outcomes for those that you are responsible for through your leadership life. So advocacy, to me, is a moral obligation that comes part and parcel with leadership at any level.
Thank you. So we're hearing, again, this common theme that is, that we are all part of the future of our children, that the child development principles are something that we not only need to acknowledge and know and implement, but also believe in and value and work collectively as a community. I love the it's we. There's a degree of selflessness that needs to be involved. I often talk, we focus in academia a lot on ourselves as we evolve through the academy, and we have to write or publish or not perish. But we tend to be quite egocentric until we realize we're at a university, and a university is a system, has universal principles, and should be leading society in principles of free speech and and values and ethics, and that, I think, renews a role for what higher ed should be in the US at this time. I think it's under threat. And without that, I think it's going to be difficult to perpetuate. I often talk about we really should have a more allocentric perspective, not an egocentric perspective, where we think about each other in that system and in that community and how we can help each other. Back to the point about schools, colleges, universities working together and working with partners, and working, obviously, today we're here to celebrate that work with Dr. Comer. I'm going to hand it over there to you. If you have any questions for this esteemed panel. Do we have any roaming mics? I don't know if we have any mics. Oh, it's coming. You're okay.
Your teaching voice.
Yeah, she just said that.
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra Grant. I'm from New York. I was with the State Education Department. And hello, panel. Thank you for all that you have said. Very interesting. And I have a comment in relationship to Erik Clemons. You said, are we called, to do the work? And I'd just like to say that I was in education for over 50 years. And I really feel that educators are called, that there is something within us that calls us to do the work that we do, because we can go against all of the isms, poverty, racism, classism, sexism, ageism, whatever is going on in that community. When you're called to do the work, you find a way to do the work. And it's not to say that you should not have a great education that is very focused and helps you to become the best teacher or the best educator that you can be. But it also speaks to the fact that we can look at identifying children and their passion. Understanding child development, the pathways. When you really get to know a child, you see passion in them for something. And I think that we identify that passion too late in life, and we miss a lot of children and a lot of educators. So if we were to think about moving forward and looking at passion education also, and looking at youngsters who have a passion for education, elementary school, middle school, or high school, before they even get to college, and begin to build the bridges that are needed in elementary school, middle school, high school, so that they have a choice to become a great educator. We will find people who want to stay, so they're not leaving at the end of 2 years, 3 years, because they have a calling on their life to do work that is so impossible, but so gratifying, so blessed. So I think that we have to call on our community, call on our universities and colleges, call on our state education departments, call on our local school districts, call on our churches, wherever we have a voice, to begin to identify those who are interested in education and begin to support them on all levels that we possibly can. There is nothing that we cannot do. All things are possible, but we must find the way to do them.
Does any of the panel want to react to that? Erik is trying to say something, right?
Me?
Yeah, no?
No.
Okay.
Oh, I was looking there. I thought they were.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Do we have another question?
Yes, my name is Franklin Jackson, and I'm not an educator. I'm a parent of 4 children, and I'm a lawyer, so I say that because I have sort of a cynical viewpoint, and I think that we're starting from the premise that everybody thinks that universal, free, compulsory education is a good thing and something that we should promote and something that should be used to bring the best out of our children. But as a lawyer, I'm a little bit cynical. I had a chance to talk to Judge Robert Carter, who was actually the lead attorney on the Brown versus Board of Education lawsuit about 20 years ago. And he said that, in his opinion, and I'm paraphrasing, and Judge Carter is no longer with us, so I don't want to misstate what he said, but this is what I remember. He said that educators had dropped the ball. He thought that lawyers had done the job of opening the door, but educators had dropped the ball because it's the system itself that needed correcting. It wasn't just integrating schools, eliminating segregation, which is just a very harsh and evil way of doing things. But segregation itself was a great evil, and even if you could open up the doors, there had to be systemic changes with regard to how we educate. And so I say all this to say that we've had Dr. Comer doing this work for 50 years, and it's excellent work. And there are a number of schools that do exactly what Dr. Comer has been teaching. But to get these methods into public schools in a systemic way has not been done in this country. And you can go to the best, most elite private schools and see the exact things that Dr. Comer is talking about, the relationships, the child development, all of that is there. But in terms of free, universal, compulsory public education, we're not doing that. And I'm not trying to point any fingers, but I am saying that the way I look at it as a lawyer, and with Brown versus Board of Education, we knew that there was inequality. And when we went in to change that, we were trying to change a system that is the status quo. And when you maintain the status quo, then nothing, you can't enhance social mobility if people aren't allowed to move from where they are to somewhere higher. And I don't want to ramble. I just want to say that Dr. Clark said it all when he talked about his school in Norfolk. Instead of the Norfolk public school system saying, this is great, let's do this everywhere in Norfolk, they said, you're cheating, something must be wrong. And so my question is, when are educators gonna say, this system is maintaining the status quo at the expense of our children, let's change the system?
Who wants to tackle that question? Cristina.
I'll try. I think that's a very difficult point you bring up, but I think as long as we're all continuing to put the effort moving forward to change the future and find more teachers out there like us that believe in the Comer process and believe that it can be better, I think that might be the thing that will eventually, hopefully, change the education system.
I appreciate Franklin, right? I appreciate what you said, and I think about that a lot, but I don't have education at the core of my thoughts. I think about it probably writ large as it relates to urban communities. I believe that this country, if not this country, definitely this city, has done a great job of creating programs and institutions that allow people who live in poverty to live comfortably in poverty. And I think education is connected to some of that as well. I also believe that education most often, if not all, but my experience has been because of that, that we always talk about opportunity, especially opportunity for Black and brown kids, right? Creating opportunity through education. Yet we never talk about or do anything about creating access when they get opportunity. And I mean access to networks, access to knowledge, access to creating a different economy. And so that is kind of the status quo, right? So we have to think about it. So I think about that, but not with education at its core, but education kind of connected to that. And we have to do something about that. We can't continue to create programs or kind of perpetuate programs that allow people to be comfortable in their poverty, where they think there are no possibilities beyond those conditions. And there are generations of people, kids are now, adults were once kids, right? And so there are generations of that happening all the time. And I think in some sense, in small part, that the education system is complicit as well.
Can I moderate his prerogative to stir up given that we're in the middle of the afternoon? I think we also need to elect officials that value education, that are ethical, that don't promote poor speech and all of those and all of the above, right? We've got a long way to go on that. So go out and vote. That's why 2008 my wife and I became citizens. Okay. Anyone else? We have one more, and then I want to ask the panel one last closing question.
Hi, I'm Mel Horton, Sacred Heart University, and I appreciate the conversation last night and the conversation we've had today. It occurred to me that the theme is relationships, and teacher preparation is at the heart of what I do, and I want to refer to a couple comments the panel made. We can do everything we can in teacher preparation to prepare candidates on theory, research, pedagogy, but we need faculty who are willing to build relationships with the schools, and the schools who are willing to allow our faculty to come into the schools. And we have got to get those two communities talking together better so that they're in the schools. Our pre-service candidates are early and often. And then once they become teachers in that first year of induction, we need school leaders who support them so that they can persist. Just because they completed a teacher prep program doesn't mean they have all the skills they need to survive induction. And if you look at the continued teaching from pre-service induction to hopefully national board certified teachers, that is all relationship building. And one thing we haven't mentioned last night or today is impact on student learning. We talk about relationships, we talk about social, emotional, academic learning, but we really haven't talked about what our goal is. Whether we're pre-service, induction, or national board, it is impact on student learning. And it doesn't have to just be the cognitive domain, it can be across multiple domains. But I just want to remind us that we're here to impact student learning.
We have one more question, and then I'm going to pose something to the panel.
Just wanted to reflect on what you were saying, especially Erik and Cristina, about if it's in your bones and in your calling, and also going through the process in your first year. And I am a former New Haven Public School teacher who was early career in Brendan Rogers turnaround and had brought some adverse child experiences to my teaching experience, but had not addressed white privilege whatsoever. And there was a very obvious gap in my ability to serve students, and that sort of rhetoric of diversity and social justice plagued me in being able to truly understand that I could not save students. I was not hired to be their savior, but I was sort of trained to believe that in some ways by the larger American education system of that time. But the Comer process and being involved in the deep relational work of the Comer process afforded me something. I feel like we're all dancing around this idea of like, well, how will we really change it? People are talking at a systemic level. And I'm thinking of the parallel processing of looking at child development in the lens of the pathways, the children in my classroom, and also looking at myself simultaneously. And that the modeling aspect of showing students how to be courageous, how to have self-awareness, what that means. I cannot teach what I don't know. So therefore, in parallel processing through the lenses of the Comer process and the pathways, I then rediscovered parts of myself that weren't necessarily addressed in preparation, right? But they were deeply addressed in being involved in SDP. And I feel like the book that you wrote in 1972, right, and then the process to follow, really gets at the deep internal self-awareness teachers and adults and stakeholders need to support children fully in knowing them, turning it around from these mindsets of saviorism and deficit lens to your liberation, my liberation is intertwined, deeply connected, relying on one another, right? If I know myself, I can see where my shortcomings are, I can better serve you, the child. So that's a messy way of getting around how the Comer process helped me with my own growth as an educator, right? I feel like a lot of times it's, oh, the Comer process for the kids. Well, the Comer process changed me and therefore afforded me better quality relationships with my students. They needed me to clear my stuff out of the way to be there for them. So there's heavy truth to that, but I speak back to, especially in terms of racial justice in our era, these tools apply there so directly and are so needed in teacher identity work and preparation work.
I'd like to comment on what you just said, because my first year, I vividly remember standing in front of my assistant principal about a very troubled student crying because I thought I could save her, and you can't. But I did learn something very valuable from my first year, which was that we might not be able to save them, but in a way, they save us. My students have changed me so much over the past 3 years. My first year was the most difficult year of my entire life, and I wouldn't change it for a minute. They changed who I am as a teacher. I'm sorry. They pushed me outside my comfort zone, and they made me feel very loved.
I'm not going to do that. That's what we're preparing at Southern Connecticut State University.
Dean,
I'm sorry.
Steve, can I just comment?
Sure.
I just would like to thank you for your courage to share that, and it was really powerful. I was just listening as an administrator, and I just want to thank you for that, because I want to ask you, did you feel safe in your process at the building level when you were going through it with your students, reflecting? Did you have that safe space to do that? And just for the feedback for an administrator, how can we support teachers who are in that space? It's just a teachable moment for me at this time.
Sure. Sorry. I think I had more growth in my classroom with my kids, taking that when I named it, and then the kids were like, great, we could finally talk about that, miss. It was easier. From classroom to classroom, I'm sure that's different. So it's not to say that wasn't supported administratively, but I definitely got that kind of conversation and comfort level and trust from our meetings, from our Comer meetings, and with my Comer facilitator, with Sheila and Dr. Fay. I think everybody comes to that at a different time. So it's hard to generalize that the whole building,
Right.
we're gaining awareness. But I would say that using the principles of the way we ran meetings definitely helped create that comfort and safety and trust. And knowing that other people were going to be willing to put that on the line if we did talk about it, because of the community we had built with the SDP program, made it easier.
Yeah.
I can't say I could walk in any room in my building and have that conversation with
Right.
my colleagues, though,
Okay.
for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, my esteemed panel, put yourself 50 years ahead, and we're at Comer's century, the centennial, the 100 years of SDP. What will we be celebrating at that event in looking in the past? And they hadn't prepared for this question. So. What's the future?
I'd like to think in the ideal that the pockets of excellence and the overwhelming evidence that supports the Comer process is brought to scale, and it's become systemically ingrained in terms of how we look at the whole child, the whole community, and it's a given as opposed to an exceptional sort of process that forward-thinking leaders are taking making the leap to push their communities ahead. That we are moved from locale to systemic thinking, and in a mindset of refining versus bringing to scale. So refinement.
Thank you, Dr. Alfano.
I'd like to see the product, the students celebrating who we are impacting now here. So our youngest students are 3, so they'll be 53, that they are here and they remember how they felt. Erik shared how he felt in school. I was a Comer kid at Martin Luther King School, and it is my fondest memories of my educational journey because that school supported us, and I just have fond memories of Martin Luther King because the teachers loved us and we felt it every day. And I would love to see a generation that we educate feel loved because of the Comer model.
Thank you.
I think 50 years from now, I would want to see, and I think we will see, that kindness and love are a central part of the narrative of schools and definitely deep inside of people. And people navigate the world with kindness and love through education. I think more broadly, I think it's a powerful thing to not only scale schools, but scale people, right, who have this inner philosophy, and that the school development program becomes the human development program.
I think I'd like to see students, without fear, showing who they really are as kids and being able to act the way they should act as a child in school. I'd love to see them be able to engage in more play and more collaborative opportunities, because I think that really helps them achieve academically if they have that baseline to be able to be who they are intrinsically.
Thank you so much.